In the heart of the city, residents were shocked to discover a charred body hanging from the facade of a famous building, as if the killer were deliberately sending a message. The scene was so bizarre that even seasoned investigators couldn't explain it. But this was only the first victim in a series of serial murders. Inspector Milo receives an urgent call from Judge Susanna, informing him that last night Tony, the CEO of a large construction company, was hanged from a high floor of the Kasamea building and burned alive. Considering the complexity and importance of the case, Susanna decides to reinstate Milo and lead the investigation, despite his previous suspension. The horrific nature of the case quickly attracts citywide attention. On his way home, all the news he hears revolves around Tony. According to the reports, he was hanged and burned alive on the 5th day after his kidnapping. The perpetrator even released a video recording of the entire crime. In the video, the flames erupt fiercely and quickly engulf Tony's body. His desperate screams shatter the quiet night. After watching the entire recording, Milo feels incredibly unwell. He is tormented by nightmares all night. The next morning, he arrived 40 minutes late to see Susanna. Having known each other for decades, Susanna understood that Milo hadn't intentionally been late. To quickly solve the case, Susanna immediately retrieved the police report. It showed that Tony had been held captive for 5 days without food or water. Therefore, his body was extremely weakened and completely incapable of resistance. Forensic experts, based on the amount of chemicals remaining at the scene, speculated that the perpetrator had poured gasoline-mixed engine oil over Tony's entire body, resulting in a fire that lasted only a few minutes. After grasping the overall situation, Milo returned to the police station to work. He had previously been suspended for assaulting his former colleague and superior. Concerned that his emotions might continue to spiral out of control, the chief decided to cancel their collaboration and assigned him a new partner, a criminal behavior analyst named Rebecca. When all the personnel were present, the police held a case meeting. The files showed that on the night of the incident, around 10 p.m., Tony left the office, drove down the highway and suddenly disappeared without a trace. The next day, his wife Pinto reported him missing. The police found Tony's car on a small road with his phone, long since switched off, still inside. This section of the road was in an area without surveillance cameras. Therefore, there were currently no clues about who kidnapped him or how he was removed from the car. However, when checking the cameras around Kasamea, the police briefly caught a glimpse of the perpetrator. They asked Milo to come and examine the footage after the meeting. Rebecca stood behind them. Being someone who worked independently, she didn't initiate conversation. She pointed out that the perpetrator had meticulously planned to abduct Tony, but not kill him immediately. The perpetrator prolonged the process, torturing Tony for 5 days. The killer deliberately chose Kasamea, one of Barcelona's most iconic tourist landmarks, as the location to burn the victim alive. If it were a typical revenge killing, the killer wouldn't have gone to such lengths. Rebecca's flexible thinking made Milo see her in a different light. After their meeting, they reviewed the video recording of the crime that the killer had released. Tony's terrified face was deliberately zoomed in, but the entire segment was muted. This suggests there may have been a dialogue the killer didn't want others to hear. Furthermore, the killer also cut out a short segment of footage during the burning of the victim. Therefore, the police have yet to identify the ignition device. Next, Rebecca extracted camera footage from around Kasamea and discovered that the killer drove a city sanitation vehicle to the scene at 5:22 a.m. The car had the slogan, "Barcelona LED Beauty Bloom" on it. Then, he used the elevator to take Tony to a higher floor. He returned to the car to refuel and exactly 8 minutes later began setting the fire. He calculated the timing with extreme precision. At 5:41 a.m., he parked the car at the 2 crime scenes in different neighborhoods. He left no fingerprints or traces. At 5:47 a.m., he returned to film a scene from below. In just 6 minutes, he completed a full movement. Milo speculated that either the killer moved extremely fast or used some kind of transmission medium. Meanwhile, the footage showed him sitting down in an open space. Kasamea's overall architecture resembles rocks eroded by the sea. The entire decoration is heavily influenced by nature. At the same time, it is also a building with strong religious symbolic significance. It marks a transition to mysticism in Gaudi's later style. The fact that the killer chose this location as the crime scene may also imply that he underwent a similar transformation. Perhaps he was pursuing maximum shock and destruction. Milo and Rebecca toured the distinctive walkways inside Kasamea. He immediately checked the spot where the killer had been sitting in the video. He discovered that the killer had left a strange letter symbol. It was believed to be the symbol of some organization that Tony had a certain connection with when he was younger. Could this be a message the killer intentionally left behind? With such meticulous preparation, he absolutely did not commit just one crime. That same night, the chairman of a large cultural foundation named Torren took a large amount of cash from the the safe, put it in a bag, went to the parking lot opposite the company, and drove away. Everything seemed normal, as usual. As the car drove down a narrow road, a mysterious figure suddenly sat up from the back seat and injected him with a sedative. The perpetrator then switched places and quietly drove away without anyone noticing. A few hours later, Milo's team received notification that the perpetrator had committed another crime. Milo stayed up all night, repeatedly watching the video of the first case. The perpetrator wore a helmet, so they couldn't see his face clearly. The conversation with Tony was also muted, making it impossible to identify him. Due to the two kidnappings occurring in quick succession, the police were forced to convene another high-level emergency meeting. This time, they also invited Susanna to participate. Torren, 63 years old, was a prominent figure in Barcelona's high society political and cultural circles. The previous evening, at around 8:50 p.m., after the board meeting ended, he said goodbye to the receptionist and left the company, and has been missing ever since. Through investigation, the police discovered his car parked on Adina Street, the same area where the car involved in Tony's case had been found. His phone was also switched off and left in the car. The method was the same, the characteristics were similar, and moreover, the palace where the Cultural Foundation's headquarters were located was also similar to Kasamea. These are both iconic works of Gaudi. Milo then presented an image of the letter G drawn on the empty plot of land at Kasamea, along with a camera recording of the killer sitting. He speculated that this was most likely the killer's signature. At the same time, considering Tony's burning to death, the preparation time was too short. This didn't seem like the plan of a single individual. The police were likely dealing with a highly intelligent criminal group, and Torren was very likely to have been starved and dehydrated for 5 days before being burned alive in one of Gaudi's works. Milo and Rebecca went together to the Güell Palace to examine the crime scene. This is one of Gaudi's earliest works in Barcelona, containing many important artifacts. They noticed a large oil painting hanging in the office. The painting depicts a hero holding a torch, hidden in the shadows. Could this be a hint that the killer lurks in the night, using fire to judge each person he deems worthy of punishment? Rebecca then discovers a seemingly unrelated landscape painting in another room. Torren's car is still parked on Adina Street, the same small road where Tony's car was found. Milo speculates that the killer used some method to subdue Torren while he was driving. His accomplice is waiting there. Together, they transport Torren to the place where he will be held for 5 days. But the question is how the killer got into Torren's car. Blocking the car in the middle of the road and getting in would be too conspicuous, inconsistent with the killer's discreet methods. Therefore, only one possibility remains. The killer was already hiding in the car before Torren got in. So Milo and Rebecca returned to the police station to review the parking lot security camera footage. They discovered that at approximately 8:34 p.m. on the night of the incident, the CCTV footage from Torren's parking spot had been muted. Meanwhile, the camera at the parking lot exit showed a faint, indistinct shadow in the back seat around 8:53 p.m. after Torren drove away. This was likely the culprit. Currently, their biggest suspicion remains the letter symbol. Milo and Rebecca have always believed it was related to Freemasonry, so the next day they consulted an expert with in-depth knowledge of the field. The expert told them that, for Freemasonry, that letter symbolizes creativity and is often placed above the seat of the school in each branch. Freemasonry is a secular organization that emphasizes charity, tolerance, and freedom, a place where atheists, agnostics, and bisexuals all have a place. But even their most devoted followers build their own inner spiritual temple and would absolutely never use crime to try to change the world. The expert asked Milo if their particular inquiry about the symbol stemmed from suspicions that the killer was connected to Freemasonry. On their way back, Rebecca investigated Torres's background. He was the youngest son of a notorious bank fraudster. In the late 1970s, due to his involvement in a series of shady transactions, he was expelled from the family business by his father. He then established himself and managed several centers supporting the underprivileged. By 1992, he began using charitable businesses to whitewash his past. He returned home in glory and regained his father's recognition. He inherited the chairmanship of a major cultural foundation and became a prominent figure in Barcelona's cultural circles. He also held seats on the boards of several organizations and was even promoted as a symbol of the city. On the second night after Torres's disappearance, the media reported on the case. In a few days, the church will hold its consecration ceremony at the cathedral. A famous journalist named Mauricio points out that the case is being handled by a police officer who should have been suspended. Therefore, public opinion cannot help but doubt whether the police are seriously investigating. Furthermore, the perpetrator has targeted Gaudi's works twice in a row, so Mauricio has nicknamed him God's Ghost. Everyone is watching the news and the perpetrator is no exception. He crosses over over piles of debris and enters the basement where Torren is being held. For 2 days and 2 nights, Torren has had no water and is exhausted, lying on the floor. He cannot speak a word. In front of him, the perpetrator stares at him with eyes full of hatred. The next day, before filming the next news broadcast, Mauricio receives a call from someone claiming to be Gaudi's ghost. He immediately tells the makeup artist to stop and goes out into the deserted hallway to take the call. The perpetrator frankly stated that he wanted to provide the press with a video recording of Torren being held captive. The meeting was scheduled for midnight tonight at the observation deck in the park. Meanwhile, with the help of her colleagues at the police station, Rebecca investigated and discovered that Tony had been involved in numerous demolition projects. In the late 1980s, his construction company handled the majority of the city's infrastructure. The construction of the ring road and highways was even referred to as his plan. Not only that, he also colluded with many wealthy individuals under the guise of urban development to forcibly evict people and plunder their wealth. As a result, tens of thousands of people were left homeless. Their conversation was only halfway through when their superior interrupted them. It turned out that the police had identified a suspect. He was a nationalist extremist who supported separatism. He had a criminal record and had been involved in numerous disturbances. Susanna introduced Milo and Rebecca to the suspect's file. John, 30 years old, was born in a poor community. The residents had fought for decades for their right to live without success. John's mother fell seriously ill and his father was forced to beg on the streets to survive. 4 years ago, his entire family received a forced eviction order. The bank took over the residential area and then sold it to Tony's company. Tony then demolished the residents' homes to build an apartment complex, making a huge profit. From then on, John harbored intense hatred for the bank and construction companies. He repeatedly organized protests to storm their offices and vandalize them. He even hung a human figure outside a building and set it on fire. Furthermore, before his death, Tony received numerous death threats from John. Regardless of John's motives or methods, everything seemed to match the killer's. Without further delay, the police immediately located John's hiding place and arrested him, along with several protesters, taking them to the police station. Near midnight, Mauricio arrived before the killer at the observation deck in the park. He also instructed the cameraman to hide in the nearby bushes to record everything. He pondered and constantly wondered why the killer had arranged to meet him in such a secluded place. What if the killer attacked him later? But to secure exclusive coverage and traffic, he had no other choice. Soon after, the killer slowly approached, wearing a helmet that completely concealed his face. He also seemed unwilling to reveal his voice, so he didn't answer any questions. He stopped about a meter away from Mauricio and handed him a disc before preparing to leave. As he turned his back, he noticed a figure hidden in the bushes but said nothing. He simply sped away from the scene. John was detained overnight. Outside the police station, shouts demanding his release echoed throughout the night. Compared to Tony, who was considered aloof and wealthy, John was far more popular with the public. During the interrogation, John didn't hide his hatred for the wealthy class. He claimed that Tony was the one who stole his parents' house. The police presented a report stating that a month earlier, John had burned an effigy on a desk in a school that had been illegally occupied. He looked at the police defiantly. He admitted that he alone had burned Tony to death. Milo exposed his lie. Based on previous clues, it was clear that there was an accomplice. Furthermore, considering John's criminal record, he always chose quick and discreet methods when lying. Milo didn't believe him and kept pressing him for the truth. In a fit of anger, he attacked the police, interrupting the interrogation. However, throughout the commotion, Rebecca, an expert in criminal behavior analysis, observed John's reactions. She concluded that the real culprit was someone else. Out of gratitude to the person who did what he wouldn't dare to do, he confessed to the crime to buy time for the police investigation. John's impulsive nature wasn't the type to patiently torture the victim for 5 days, carefully edit the video, and conceal his identity. Even if he did something immoral, with that mindset, he couldn't possibly be the mastermind. Meanwhile, tomorrow will be the 5th day since Torren was kidnapped. His death is imminent. After work, Rebecca went to Milo's house to discuss the case. Just then, Susanna called Milo and told him to turn on the news. Mauricio had released a video showing Torren being held captive. In the footage, he was illuminated by a very strong light. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse, and he repeatedly begged for money to buy his life. But the person filming didn't respond, only continuously taking money from a briefcase, crumpling it into balls, and throwing it at him. This showed that what they needed wasn't money, and Torren had to die. By the 5th day of the kidnapping, the police had deployed forces at all of Gaudi's properties, patiently waiting for the perpetrator to appear. But even late into the night, there was no sign of activity. They speculated that the perpetrator had realized the police were on alert and had changed his plan. The police ordered a complete withdrawal of forces, stating that continuing to wait was not a good good idea. However, on the very night the deployment was cancelled, an elderly woman living near Gale Park accidentally saw a strange black car pull up from her window. The next morning, the old woman, as usual, went to the nearby church to pray. Most of the faces there were familiar. No one felt the need to be wary of anyone. After praying, everyone turned to greet each other, asking who the person next to them was. The police's worst fears ultimately came true. Witnesses discovered Torren's charred body in Gale Park. A letter G was drawn on the empty plot of land. The entire scheme was identical to Tony's case. At the special investigation meeting at the police station, Mauricio released another video sent to him by the killer. In it, Torren was drenched in oil and hanging from a giant cross. This interrogation was presided over by Susanna herself. Mauricio did not request a lawyer and answered all of Susanna's questions fluently. He concealed the fact that he had ever met the killer and lied, saying that both times he had discovered the optical disc in the mailbox outside his door. After regaining consciousness, there was no note or envelope. It was simply wrapped in plastic. He had previously seen the police analysis of the killer and understood that this person would certainly not leave fingerprints on it. Susanna continued to question him, asking if he had never considered that if he had promptly handed over the video recording of Torren's captivity to the police, they might have been able to save him from death. Currently, there is no evidence to prove a connection between Mauricio and the killer, so they could only release him. However, Susanna reassured Milo and Rebecca that she had arranged for police around Mauricio's house and was monitoring him daily. But the images of the police taking Mauricio away were heavily exploited by the media. They criticized that even freedom of the press was being violated. Instead of focusing on the powerful figure behind the killer, the police were harassing people unrelated to the case. Mauricio's ostentatious behavior and loud voice also caught the killer's attention. His gaze as he watched the news seemed ready for murder. Milo and Rebecca reviewed the video recording. Just like the tapes from previous cases, the audio was muted when the killer spoke to Torren. But based on his lip movements, Rebecca recognized him saying, "You're not him." Milo suddenly remembered that in the 1980s, Torren had managed several centers for the disadvantaged. This was a clue that the police had yet to verify. It was possible that someone among them had a deep-seated grudge against him. Therefore, the two asked a colleague to search all the records of the centers for the disadvantaged and check if Tony had any connection to Torren's. After agreeing, he added that on the morning Torren's body was discovered, an old woman had died in the church. She lived near Gale Park, not far from the scene where Torren was burned. Milo and Rebecca immediately went to the church. It was almost unchanged from before. As soon as Milo entered, he felt as if he was seeing himself from the years he had lived there. The priest's voice brought him back to reality. The two asked about the unusual circumstances before the old woman's death. The priest said that she came to pray every day, always sitting in the back pews. On the day of the incident, everyone had left, but she hadn't departed yet. Someone noticed something was wrong and gently patted her, only to discover she had stopped breathing. When they took her to the doctor, they found a bruise on her wrist. This was a noteworthy detail, but because of her advanced age, the doctors didn't pay much attention to it and casually dismissed it as normal. As the two were about to leave, they coincidentally met an old priest who had taught Milo years ago. He observed Milo from head to toe and sarcastically remarked that he was the worst student he had ever taught. Milo refused to back down and retorted that at least he wasn't like the priest, willingly becoming a cowardly accomplice. He clearly saw so many students being abused and chose to turn a blind eye. Milo immediately led Rebecca away. In the car, Rebecca asked if Milo had ever been a victim of abuse in his childhood. Tragedy after tragedy continues to repeat itself year after year. In previous cases, most of the perpetrators were victims of sexual abuse. Rebecca speculated that such incidents likely occurred at centers for the vulnerable, causing victims to harbor resentment for years. As adults, they sought revenge against those who had caused them suffering. And based on the killer's pattern, shortly after committing a murder, he would abduct his next target. But who that person would be, no one knew. That evening, Susanna went to her usual yoga studio to teach her fitness routine. Before leaving, she got into her car as usual. Just over 10 minutes drive and she would be home. But she had no idea that a man was waiting in the back seat with a syringe. When the car entered a narrow road in an area without cameras, the man struck. The next day, Milo received a call from Susanna's assistant saying that she hadn't been home since the night before. She hadn't shown up for work and no one could contact her. At the height of the case's tension, Milo's heart sank. She was his closest friend, someone who had been by his side for half his life. Could she also be the target of the killer? As he walked, lost in thought, Milo was unfortunately hit by a speeding car, but he didn't have time to pay attention to the pain in his body. Upon receiving news from the police station, he immediately rushed to a small street. This place was identical to the previous crime scenes, also in the same neighborhood. After examining the scene, it was found that Susanna Susanna's car was still there, but she had been moved elsewhere. Her phone was switched off and left in her gym bag on the passenger seat. Using the same familiar method, it was clear the perpetrator was the very killer they were searching for. The forensic team reported that the elderly woman's blood contained a large amount of anesthetic. The bruise on her wrist was the mark left by an injection. Considering that in previous kidnapping cases, the victims were also likely subdued with sedatives, Rebecca suspected that the killer of the elderly woman in the church was the same perpetrator. However, the elderly woman's age didn't match the other victims at all, so what reason would the killer have for killing her? Susanna's assistant rushed over to ask about the progress of the investigation in relation to the secrets of the previous cases. Milo asked in return if he knew anything about Susanna's past work. Meanwhile, Susanna was being held in a cold enclosed room. Outside the bars, the killer, holding a high-intensity light, relentlessly shone it into her eyes. She couldn't see if the face before her was real or an illusion, only hearing a nearly cruel voice responding in the darkness. The police investigation revealed that under the name of Torren's, the first center for the vulnerable was established to take in homeless children. After its successful operation, he went on to open 2 more centers. The remaining information is still largely untraceable, but there's one extremely suspicious point. In 1992, after Torrens left his position and took over his father's finances, the building housing the first center for the disadvantaged was burned down. All the case files were also destroyed. The speed was so rapid, it seemed like a deliberate act of destruction. The kidnapping case reached a dead end. Milo and Rebecca could only place their hope in the old woman's death. They went to her house to see her daughter. Having recently lost her mother, the daughter's voice choked with emotion as she spoke. She said that her mother had been kind her whole life and had never wronged anyone. The only thing that could affect her peaceful old age was the upcoming reconstruction plan. According to the plan, all the houses around Gale Park would be forcibly demolished, including their house. Milo and Rebecca went up to the second-floor balcony together. From here, the park entrance was clearly visible. Susanna, the investigator in charge of the serial murders, had been kidnapped by the killer. Mauricio, of course, wouldn't miss this hot spot. He even joked on television that the building where he was filming might become the next crime scene. Shortly after the broadcast, he received another call from the killer, requesting a meeting at 1 a.m. at the same location. The killer said he had new footage to give him, but only if he appeared alone. After hanging up, he opened the window and looked around. 2 police officers were still following him. If they continued to follow him like this, the killer would certainly not reveal himself, meaning he would lose the opportunity to get shocking news. Therefore, he deliberately led the police on a circuitous route throughout the city. Sometimes he would hide in alleys inaccessible to police cars. Other times he would take refuge in complex shopping malls. He thought of every way to widen the distance. Taking advantage of the police's inability to catch up, he climbed into the cameraman's car and quickly disappeared. He had no idea that what awaited him was not wealth and glory. Milo and Rebecca went to the archives to retrieve the list of the first center for the vulnerable. They suspected that the perpetrator had been in this center in the 1980s, possibly abused, leading to emotional disorders and belief problems, thus forming a dissociative coping mechanism. After more than 20 years of preparation to complete his revenge plan, by 2010, the perpetrator was at least 35 years old. Mauricio had the cameraman drive him around several times. After confirming that there were no police following them, he repeatedly instructed the cameraman to hide well and absolutely not let the perpetrator see him. He also told the cameraman to park the car further away while he proceeded alone to the meeting point. This time, the killer arrived earlier than expected and unusually broke the rule and spoke to him. The next morning, Rebecca frantically woke Milo up. The police station had just received news that another burned body had appeared on the fence of Gale Park. Milo and Rebecca rushed to the scene. His heart suddenly ached intensely. He feared that the killer had lost patience and murdered Susanna before the 5 days were up. The victim killed last night was Mauricio. Susanna was still being held captive in the underground cage. On the 3rd day of her abduction, she finally saw the killer's true face, but she still couldn't remember any past grievances with him. He smiled coldly and calmly said his name was Hector. Meeting the person she least wanted to see brought back the deepest memories in Susanna's heart like a tidal wave. As a child, she and her brother lost their parents and were forced to move to a center for the disadvantaged. Torrens, under the guise of charity, adopted them, but he committed incredibly abhorrent acts. Every time Torrens closed the door and drew the curtains, Hector and Helena could only stare at the sunflower painting on the wall, trying to numb their feelings. They considered reporting him. At that time, Susanna was working at the juvenile court, but due to lack of evidence, Torrens was ultimately acquitted. After Hector and Helena returned to the center, what awaited them were repeated periods of solitary confinement, each lasting several days, without food or water. Mauricio's autopsy report was also available. Before being burned, the perpetrator injected him with a large dose of anesthetic, the same type found in the old woman's brain blood. At the same time, through her colleague Rebecca, she investigated a woman who had worked at the first center for the vulnerable. She immediately took Milo to meet this woman. The woman still remembered the events of the past very clearly. In the 1980s, rumors circulated that Torren had filmed numerous videos of himself sexually assaulting his victims, but no one could find any evidence, so everyone dismissed it as just a rumor. What struck her most as strange was Torren's extremely cruel methods of controlling the children. Even the slightest transgression would result in them being locked in the basement for 3 to 4 days. The most striking example was a pair of brothers. The older brother, in defiance of Torren's, had set fire to the dormitory. At this point, Milo and Rebecca understood completely. In the 1980s, the perpetrator had lived in a center for the disadvantaged. By 2011, they were around 40 years old and a pair of brothers. This perfectly matched the hypothesis that the perpetrators were two people. Furthermore, they both hated Torren. It was highly possible these were the people the police were looking for. Unfortunately, the woman couldn't remember their names. Milo had no choice but to ask Susanna's assistant to look through the cases she had handled to see if anyone matched these criteria. Time flies. Tomorrow will be the papal blessing ceremony at the Sagrada Familia, and also the 5th day since Susanna's abduction. Since the 1970s, residents around the Sagrada Familia have protested against its transformation into a memorial site, but they clearly failed. Countless innocent people were forced to leave their homes. And after the 1992 Olympics, the Sagrada Familia became a symbol of Barcelona. Milo suspects the perpetrator deliberately chose this location, wanting to use this momentous occasion to cause a stir at the Sagrada Familia. At dawn, Milo receives a call from Susanna's assistant. He says he has found a pair of brothers who perfectly fit the criteria. Documents show that in 1974, their mother died in a traffic accident. 2 days before they were taken to the Center for the Vulnerable, their father also tragically passed away. Milo and Rebecca immediately got in their car and drove to their old residence. Along the way, their colleagues informed them of new clues. The two brothers were born into a middle-class family. After their mother's death, they continued to live with their father. However, at that time, the area around their house was under construction for a ring road, and all residents were forcibly relocated. Tony was in charge of the project. Their father died while trying to stop a bulldozer from entering, a scene the two brothers witnessed firsthand. Afterwards, their father was buried in the family cemetery on Montjuic Mountain while they were placed in a center for the vulnerable. It could be said that Tony was the source of their lifelong tragedy. Milo and Rebecca cautiously infiltrated the brothers' house, but it was uninhabited. Milo raised his gun and headed towards the basement, but when he opened the door, he accidentally activated a trap the brothers had set. Fire immediately broke out. Fortunately, Susanna had been moved elsewhere beforehand. Just then, a colleague called to inform them that they had verified that the older brother in the pair was a craftsman working at the Sagrada Familia. All the workers had said they would be attending the ceremony today, and it was highly likely he had infiltrated the group. The Pope was about to appear. The older brother clutched the lighter in his hand, ready to ignite it. He recalled the scene from decades ago when his father fell right here. From that moment on, what awaited him was the filthy doors of the Center for the Marginalized. After his parents' deaths, for the rest of his life, no one had truly treated him like a human being. His pain, his hatred, were ultimately obscured by the applause for what was called a great achievement. The entire city was painted so magnificently. Who had ever imagined how much blood and tears of the lower classes were buried beneath it? He stood up, intending to approach the Pope's car, but the patrolling police noticed his suspicious behavior. He tried to flee, but it was too late. The first warning bullet pierced his body, but the pain was insignificant compared to what he had experienced before. By the time Milo and Rebecca arrived, it was too late. According to witnesses, Helena had separated from her brother. She had gone alone to the rooftop of Güell Palace. Milo ordered the police to immediately cordon off the area. Then he led Rebecca there. As they walked, he tried to convince Helena that none of this was their fault. They had already suffered too much. She looked towards the Sagrada Familia in the distance without any suspicion. In her heart, she knew her brother had failed. She said it was ridiculous, troublesome. She said that long ago she had come to Güell Palace to find Torres, wanting to burn both her and the place down. But she was too afraid, not even daring to face the painting directly. She turned to Milo and asked why Tony had stolen her house, why Torres had hurt her, and why Susanna had declared Torres innocent. But she said that she no longer needed any of those answers. A tragedy, in the end, could only end in tragedy. Meanwhile, Rebecca suddenly realized where Susanna had been taken. She had previously heard from a colleague that the two brothers had a family tomb on Montjuic Mountain. Hiding someone there could be done completely undetected. Sure enough, when Milo and Rebecca arrived, they broke open opened the tomb bearing the name Hector and rescued Susanna, who was wrapped in a black cloth bag. The case finally came to an end. The film ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.